例えば己の一生が全て定められていたとしたらどうだろう。人生におけるあらゆる選択、些細なものから大事なものまで選んでいるのではなく選ばされているとしたらどうだろう。無限の可能性などというものは幻想であり、人はどれだけあがこうとも定められた道の上から降りられない。止める者は止めるように、貧しき者は飢えるように、善人は善人として、悪人は悪人として、美しき者、醜き者、強き者、弱き者、幸福な者、不幸な者、そして勝つ者、負ける者、すべて初めからそうなるように、それ以外のものにはなれぬように定められていたとしたらどうだろう。ならばどのような咎人にも罪はなく、聖人にも徳などない。何事も己の意志で決めたのではなく、そうさせられているだけだとしたら、ただ流されているだけだとしたら、問うが諸君がそれでよしとするのか。持てる者らはただ与えられただけに過ぎない虚構の玉座に満足か。持たざる者らは一片の罪咎なしに虐げられて許せるか。いいな、断じていいな。それを知った上で笑える者など、生きるということの意味を忘れた劣等種、人とは呼べぬ奴隷だろう。気の抜けた勝利の酒ほど今日のそげるものはない。運命とやらに舐めさせられる敗北ほど耐え難い苦渋はない。このような屈辱を、このような茶番劇をただ繰り返し続けるのが人生だ。よし、私はあがき抜こう。どこまでもどこまでも道が終わるまで歩き続ける。はるか果てに至った場所で私は私だけのオペラを作る。ゆえに諸君らの力を借りたい。虐げられ踏み潰され、今まさに殺されんとしている君ら、ひととき同胞だった者たちよ。諸君らは敗北者として生まれ、敗北者として死に続ける。その運命を呪うのならば、私のもとに来るが100度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、1000度繰り返し戦えばいい。1000度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、万度繰り返し戦えばいい。未来永劫永遠に勝つまで戦い続けることを誓えばいいよ。それができるというならば、諸君らが術の一部となることを許可しよう。永劫勝つため。獣の盾が、その一本一本が諸君らの血肉で編まれることを祝福しよう。今はまだ私も君らも、そして彼も忌々しい輪の内ではあるものの、これから先ここでの選択が真に意味あるものであったと思えるように、いつかはきっとこの無限に続く輪を壊せるように。さあどうする諸君ら、この時代の敗北者たちよ。私に答えを聞かせてくれ。戦うか否か。
Powerful words. Very powerful words. For a powerful game. This is Irae Amantes Amentes. Irae is Latin for the Day of Wrath, based off of like a Latin hymn, which is often sung during Mass for the dead. Amantes Amentes. I couldn't really find a rough translation on that, but from what I understand, it's basically saying that like love is foolish or foolhardy or what have you. So yeah, this is I guess a remake of an old VN that is absolutely amazing from what I understand. And this is free on Steam. Well, it's following the Chusingura method, so the common route is free. If you want to continue the story, they have other routes you can buy. But yeah, I've heard absolutely amazing things about this game, and I cannot wait to try it. So, May 1st, 1945, Berlin, Germany. Right in the heart of World War II. 12:27 a.m. Hang on one second here. Is there audio? Oh, here we go. Okay, much better. The closing act of the Second World War was the manifestation of total war such as had never been seen before. No, the term carnage would have been more appropriate. Outmanned in every way, Berlin stood in complete isolation, slipping towards a crevice of annihilation. The nearly 500,000 troops marching under the banner of the Red Army had already surrounded the capital, making escape virtually impossible. This was the final days of Berlin and the final days of World War II. Guns roared, mingling with the screams of the dying in an incessant cacophony of terror as the city was razed and its people massacred. Bloodshed, carnage, all in order to eradicate the enemies of this world, be they young or old, man or woman. Justice, revenge, love, peace, oppression, liberty, equality, the slogan one chose to attach to the horror, made little difference. The chaos engulfing the bloody streets demonstrated quite readily the atrocities that would manifest when man was presented with a convenient higher cause to justify them with. Yes, for example, in this corner of the city, a blinding light flashed, followed by a roaring explosion. This latest bombardment sent even more soldiers, at least 3 whose silhouettes were still recognizably human, to their deaths, spreading their remains across the pavement. Letting out a loud curse, a man leapt from the trenches with Panzerfaust in hand. My bad. Protected by the covering fire of his allies, Schmeisers. I don't know German, so if I'm butchering this, I'm so sorry. He dashed over into effective firing range. He rose to his knees, took aim, and pulled the trigger, firing a heat warhead. The projectile shot forward, smashing right into the flank of a tank. Its armor dissolved in accordance with the Newman effect, and the tank imploded in a torrent of liquefied metal, 1,000-degree flames. The man tossed aside his Panzerfaust and, backed by comrades from behind, started cleaning up his remaining foes with his Mauser. Such was war. It allowed no time for idle thoughts. Only slaughter, murder, and bloodshed. No man could keep his sanity in this hell. And so the perpetrators of this chaos howled and raged, never looking back, not once. Reveling in boundless insanity to keep their blood afire. Within this flaming wasteland of gunplay, soldiers single-mindedly continued their murderous dance, as if it were some godly ritual. Of course, in reality, it was all but child's play. Soldiers against soldiers, rifles against pistols. No matter how fiercely they fought on this battlefield, the outcome of this war was already set in stone. The Third Reich had crumbled. The ambitions of its visionary leader lost in the flames of war. What remained on that tattered battlefield was the shaken remnants of the defeated, and the mob of victors flocking like vultures to the smell of decaying flesh. Certain death. Inescapable defeat. Any attempt to retaliate was merely a self-serving act of revenge with no hope of salvation. The situation had surpassed anything that might elicit notions of despair, transforming into no more than an absurd comedy of sorts. And yet, his heart beat still. His hand gripped steel. He would not stop so long as there were enemies to kill. For it was his sworn duty If there existed even one thing, anything at all, to justify this hellfire, be it sheer insanity, then that by itself would have been a blessing in disguise. Honor and glory debased and disgraced worth less than pig shit. Yet human life remained the cheapest currency. That was reality. This was war.
これだけか。残ったのは。
After wiping out all leftover foes and regrouping with his comrades, it dawned upon the man that there were only 3 of them left standing, himself included. The company tasked with protecting this block had been completely annihilated. The situation was anything but promising, and still more enemies were on their way.
パンツァーファウストは。先ほどあなたが使ったのが最後ですよ、総長。これはいよいよ終わりが見えてきましたね。
The young man flashed a bitter smile as he handed over his Schmeiser to the other. The older man glared at him but offered no more in the way of reproach. The war is lost. Indeed, that was the bitter truth of it. Berlin had fallen. The company massacred, and the remaining 3 soon to join them.
まあ、ここまで来たら別にそれもいいですけどね。ただ、最後は格好よく行きたいから、どうせ逃げられやしないんだし。 貴様、名前はヨアヒム・ブラウナーと言います。総長は俺はバルター・ゲルリッツ。ま、名前も知らない奴と死ぬのはお互いにごめんだからな。おい。
The Master Sergeant, Walter Gerlitz, directed his gaze at the final survivor of the company, a young boy who had thus far remained silent.
貴様の名前は
That's not a boy. The boy, eyes darting as he failed to hide his shock, was even younger than Joachim, barely in his teens. If Walter had a son, he might have been around the same age. Marco Schmidt. Walter was about to ask what a mere child was doing there, but ultimately swallowed his words. It was a foolish question. The enemy would show no mercy to them, not even to children. They were killed on sight, usually. For it was very clear. They were the bitter enemies of the Red Army, the despised members of the Schutzstaffel. That's the SS. Even if they were to surrender, the Soviets were doubtlessly uninterested in taking them as prisoners. As such, fighting until their last breath was the only option left to them. They were going to die either way. Go out with a bang, right? Walter was certain that Joachim was ready to give his life for the fatherland. The boy, on the other hand...
この戦争が終わったら、ベルリンは、ドイツは、どうなってしまうんでしょうか。僕たちの家族や友人は、一体この先。
知らないな、そんなのは。どうせあれだ。戦勝国様が偉そうに、俺たちを悪魔だ、非人道的だなどと裁くのさ。 笑わせるぜ。
Joachim shed his his disaffected act, the bitter tone in his voice making his true position of the situation clear.
ドレスデンに母さんと妹がいたんだ。爆撃でぶっ飛ばされて、骨のかけらも見つからない。悪魔だって。一体何の冗談だ。 俺たちは国のために戦ってただけなのに、それをあいつらクソ舐めやがって。
I think now's a good time to kind of tell you guys that, it's easy to make monsters of Nazis and SS folk, because what they did is was horrible. But what you understand is that not everyone was like that. A lot of people really didn't have a choice in the matter. Germany was on very hard times after World War I. Their country was pretty much, in the crapper. And you have a charismatic Adolf Hitler who's, goes up there and riles up the people and saying that he's going to make the country great again. He's going to bring back, the former glory of Germany. And you follow him because you have no choice. You don't, a lot of these people had nothing. And it's easy to sit there and say, yeah, these guys are Nazis, they deserve to die and all that stuff. But, that's not true. They had, people had families, loved ones. You know, not everyone. I mean, yeah, sure, some of them were horrible people. I'm not gonna say that. You know, I'm not sitting there. You know, I'm not gonna defend the Nazis, of course, but you know, these were human people. These were human beings. You know, and you know, these weren't just faceless monsters for the most part. So, you know, you really have to look at it from, you know, from their perspective as well. You know, these people are just fighting not to die. You know, they're going to be killed anyway because, you know, everyone thought the Nazis were horrible people. And by and large, they were. I'm not going to sit there and defend them to the death or anything, but they were human beings. And right here, you know, this is like, you know, they had people who died in the war too, you know. Sad. You know, war's horrible. It always brings out the worst in everybody. Always. He would never surrender. Yet even if he gave his life in the battle to come, the outcome of the war had already been decided. Nothing could change that, least of all himself. With this defeat, their fatherland and their descendants would. A single soldier was powerless to alter the great current of war. Joachim tried to express his dissatisfaction with that reality as best he could, while Marco silently listened.
だから俺は
Several rifle shots echoed from their left just then. Walter and Marco just barely managed to duck into cover, but Joachim was not so fortunate. His head was shot clean off by the first wave, followed by an entire volley of bullets being unloaded into his chest. Oh god. Pelted by machine gun fire, Joachim's body contorted in a queer manner almost reminiscent of some form of dance before finally hitting the ground. An anticlimactic finale indeed for the youth who had only moments prior expressed a desire to fight to the bitter end. But such was the reality of the situation. The reality of war. There were no heroes here. No messiahs or miracles to save them. Only men dying like insects. And should one allow his soul to be overcome by wrath or despair when confronted with this knowledge, it would only serve him to invite the jaws of death to consume him next. The chaos of war would not tolerate idle thoughts. Knowledge of one's duty was all that was necessary. As Walter rolled into the safety of a ruined building, he shouted the name of his lone surviving comrade with all the strength he could muster. But instead of words, the sole reply he received was yet another flash, followed by a fiery explosion. The upper half of the young boy's body was flung at Walter's feet. The cramped alleyway was heavy with the stench of blood and scorched entrails. Walter powerlessly dropped to his knees in the vast sea of blood.
そうちゃんすみません役に立てませんでした
Yeah, 1 second. Marco smiled, even as the last embers of his life faded away. It was unbelievable someone could still form words in a state such as this. Walter took the boy's hand.
死にたくないですここで死んだら僕たちは一体これは何の総長教えてください僕たちは悪魔なんですベルリンはドイツは
As the gunfire continued, a brand new tank rolled onto the battlefield. Marco Schmidt was beyond help. Not even God could save him now. And so, Walter's rightful place now was on the battlefield, his hand clutching a gun and not the hand of a dying soldier. His ears lent not to the naive parting remarks of a boy, but straining to hear the breathing of his enemy. He knew that better than anyone, and yet,
僕たち悪いことしたのでしょうかだから手に合うのでしょうか人を殺すさ
Joachim, Walter, and so many other German soldiers just like them had done nothing more than take up arms to protect their fatherland and loved ones. Was that truly a sin? Surrounded by the flames of the dying capital, the young boy spoke in mere disjointed fragments, voicing a question Walter himself would have loved to pose to the heavens above. Yet after mere seconds of doubt, Walter answered curtly. Such was the way of the world, a cruel, bitter truth. Walter found within himself a growing resentment for the Lord. Marco Schmidt then quietly passed away in Walter's arms. The man gazing up at the heavens, the young soldier's smile on death, albeit tainted with blood and mud, still held traces of boyhood. A bitter smile mirroring Marco's crept onto Walter's face.
次は勝とう。次で勝てなければ次の次で。それでもダメならまたその次で。100万回も繰り返せばこんな結末をひっくり返せるかもしれない。
His words might have seemed the ramblings of a lunatic beset by the armies of death, but they were more than that. Walter cocked his Schmeiser, confirmed it was loaded, and then charged out of the ruined building into the open. He unconsciously let out a battle cry loud enough that it threatened to rend his throat. Would he end up gunned down like Joachim, or share the same fate as Marco? It hardly mattered anymore. Either way, he'd merely die a miserable death befitting this miserable war. His mind was occupied by such despaired thoughts. In no way could he have predicted what was to come next.
天に増します我らの父よ。願わくは皆の尊まれんことを。彼らに永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
It was his soldier's intuition that drove Walter to reflexively take shelter. His vision was drowned out by a blinding white light and an explosion so fierce it dwarfed all previous bombardments, an explosion that seemed to rip apart the very heavens itself. Walter realized that this explosion was far beyond the level of any weapon that could have possibly been employed in urban warfare. What in the world had happened? Look at that. The city he had literally staked his life to protect had been reduced to a charred wasteland. Although it took quite a while for Walter to regain his sight and hearing, there was still not enough time for him to make sense of the situation. Part of him wondered if it was just all a sick joke. Only one thing was clear. Both his allies' corpses and the encroaching enemy's troops had been annihilated. No bombing raid could have inflicted such immense damage, and although Walter had managed to survive the attack, his resulting wounds were deep. Pieces of steel and concrete blasted in his direction by the explosion pierced his back and flank. The hand that had once held his Schmeiser was blown off from the elbow. It wasn't even worth the effort to attempt to discern the number of more minor injuries. His incessant bloody vomit told him that he had also suffered severe internal damage. He would not make it. Death was coming. Walter swore blindly, no longer certain of the target of his indignation. Just then the voice from before rang out again.
我が祈りを聞きたまえ。生きとし生けるもの、すべては主に帰せん。我が魂よ、再び安らぐがよい。主は報いてくださるがゆえに。
It was a requiem offered up to fallen soldiers. One sung in a beautiful voice. Not even a prestigious church choir could produce a melody quite this dignified. Yet at the same time, the scorn seeping into the voice was all too evident. Only upon the eve of the apocalypse itself could such a voice be conceived of as an angel's. It sung of the dead with scorn, ridicule, and mockery, deriving the utmost pleasure in trampling upon every last remnant of the dignity they possessed. The voice of a destroyer intoxicated by mayhem. This was the product of a black mind possessed solely by an inhuman malice.
彼らに永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
And so, stepping onto the vast expanse of debris, the destroyer appeared, the demonic requiem at his lips. Wow. It was a young boy, lacking in years even in comparison to Marco, with a face so delicate that a careless glance could easily mistake his features for those of a girl's. A single look at the boy was enough to give Walter chills. His teeth began to chatter. Oh, look at that. Although he had lost a considerable amount of blood and his vision had grown hazy, the reason behind his freezing chill at his back lay elsewhere. The sheer enmity and bane radiating from the boy's visage had indeed contributed to that. But to Walter, the most dreadful thing was the fact that he knew that face. There lived no man who fought on the Eastern Front and knew naught of this boy. A beast possessed by an insatiable hunger, his aberrant mind ruled by inhuman madness. His single eye gleamed, silver locks swaying. He gripped a pair of guns, each engraved, with a wolf's angel, the rune of the wolf. There was no doubt. It was a face Walter could never forget. The face of a boy who had supposedly died 3 years ago. Eastern Front Assault Corps Special Unit Leader SS Major Wolfgang Schreiber. An unchained beast that slaughtered both friend and foe. The ashen demon that had supposedly met his end during a purge. How could he be standing here?
ああ、誰かと思えばバルター・ゲルリッツ総長かい？アインザッツグルペンじゃ迷惑かけたね。元気かい？
Hardly the words one would offer a dying comrade, especially one whose death was most likely caused by Schreiber himself. The boy flashing an innocently devilish smile in front of Walter was no doubt the very same person he remembered. And yet his armband bore not the swastika, but a different symbol altogether. Almost as if he were no comrade at all.
あなたはなぜここに？
なぜも何も僕も君も軍人だろ？戦って殺すのが商売なんじゃないのかな？
The boy playfully surveyed the landscape. It was proof enough of his statement, and what followed was nothing short of unnatural. Something akin to opaque vapor erupted in their vicinity like a fog or haze. At the same time, Walter's senses were assaulted by a dreadful moaning. Look at that. Ghosts. These were the cursed cries of the fallen, fated to suffer and lament until the very end of time. This endless chorus of lamentation caused even the seething air of the battlefield to cool. These were the spirits of the dead. Walter felt like he could almost make out the faces of Marco and Joachim among the swirling mass, as well as the destination toward which they were spiraling. Straight into Schreiber's Totenkopf eye patch. He was devouring the very souls of those he had slain. Confronted with such a repulsive, unworldly spectacle, Walter could not determine whether he should give himself over to rage or simply weep. He longed for the repose of insanity.
さて、それじゃあ総長、僕はもう行かないといけないんだけど。
Schreiber, seemingly done with his meal, wearily turned his neck to Walter. He was breathing his last, not in any condition to spill blood like a soldier should.
殺し足りなくはないのかい？今さら連中の100や1000を殺したところで何も変わりやしないけどね。でもだからって何もせずに黙ってる必要なんかどこにもない。見なよこのベルリンを。全くひどいありさまじゃないか。こんなものが僕らの求めた千年帝国の終わりだなんて誰が納得するって言うんだよ。
Content?
できないよね。
Walter threw a piercing glance at the smiling boy. Indeed. No one in the right mind would be content with such an outcome. He'd had friends to call his own, family to go home to, a woman to love. He cherished his country. All that became tainted due to Germany's defeat, dishonor that no centuries would ever wash clean. That was...
許せないよね。薄汚い劣等ごときが我が物顔で帝都を蹂躙するなんて。女や子供や年寄りを犯して殺して吊るすなんてさ。総長、忠勇なるドイツ軍人バルター・ゲルリッツ総長殿、君の気持ちを聞かせてくれ。君は一体どうしたい？
The amount of blood leaking forth from Walter's mouth made speech difficult, but his feelings were set. Joachim, who vowed to fight till the bitter end, Marco, who wished for victory, their feelings as well as his own. The boy standing before him was unmistakably from the fold of the devil, but such things mattered little at that point. What he wanted was...
勝ちたい。
victory, honor, and glory to the fatherland, to bring peace for friends and family that had fallen, to bring prosperity for generations yet unborn, and above all else, for his own very soul.
ジーク入る。そうさ総長、素晴らしいよその息だ。君のような勇者にこそあの方の血肉となる資格がある。戦争は終わらない。僕たちが終わらせない。何度でも何度でも何度でも何度でも続けて続けて続けて続けて
Grant us victory.
掴むまで共に行こうじゃないか。無限に続く戦場へ。
We shall claim victory in the next war, if not, in the one after that. Hundreds and thousands and millions of battles repeating over and over again until this outcome can finally be toppled. Schreiber thrust his Mauser in Walter's direction as the last light of the man's soul began to fade.
彼らに永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
His requiem was one of scorn for the fallen, pregnant with malicious intent. And yet Walter thought it beautiful, like the song of an angel. It was then that he finally realized that this was the apocalypse, and that he would soon join the ranks of those marching to destroy the world. He would become a strand of the beast's mane, one of many in his legion. The boy gazed to the heavens and offered up a splitting cackle, his silver hair dancing. The soul of Walter Gerlitz was sucked into the boy's blood-crazed eye and vanished. At the same time, in another place, a new nightmare was unfolding. An entire battalion of at least a dozen tanks had failed to bring down a single man. No. An entire battalion of tanks was being destroyed by a single man. In the center of the supernatural maelstrom stood a sombre specimen of a man darker than the blackest of nights. Beneath his neatly worn uniform stretched a body of steel trained to the utmost limit. Ooh, look at that guy. He's got another one of those, like, sashes or whatever. a perfect fusion of the sort of artistry found in the great sculptures of antiquity and raw martial prowess. The man wielded nothing, not even a short blade. He fought with his fists alone. But they were all that he needed to sunder the armor of a tank, as it were nothing more than scrap paper. Needless to say, no mere man could hope to imitate this display. Indeed, he was a monster. Or if not, a weapon taking human form, a fortress upon the battlefield. Either way, the Soviet forces were dealing with an inhuman soldier, a being exceeding human boundaries. Furthermore, the towering beast of a man had yet so much to attempt to evade any of the artillery fire being leveled upon him. Even after being pelted by countless bullets and tank shells, his body remained unscathed. However, that was only natural. Whoa. For everyone knew this man, this strength, and his name. Knew that he was a hero who had died a year before, and what was dead could not be killed. The man let out a deep breath. His overflowing will melted the surrounding rubble into toxic waste, blasting it afar with a gust of burning wind. His tightened muscles expanded to their extremes as if longing for release. A hammer of steel. There existed nothing in this universe that could withstand the blow he was prepared to unleash. The energies gathered in his fists gave birth to a fraction, causing the very visage of the man to distort. But as the man finished swelling up with energy and was about to unleash destruction, his fierce concentration suddenly let up, just as it was about to reach critical mass. Almost as if something had ruined his mood. Perhaps he thought the panicking soldiers, having lost their morale, were not even worth killing. Then had those soldiers miraculously escaped the jaws of death? Of course not.
この世で狩りに勝る楽しみなどない。
The song of the cruel huntress echoed across the night. A scorching wave of pure flame passed by the man, devouring the soldiers, burning them to cinders. This was clearly no ordinary weapon. Its destructive force far exceeded the power of Molotov cocktails or tank fire. It was more akin to the pulse of concentrated energy from a nuclear blast, as impossible as that seemed, than any urban weapon. Otherworldly screams of pure agony reverberated throughout the war-torn battlefield, now engulfed by a sea of flames. The soldiers, assailed by the instantaneous burst of fire, had evaporated without a trace. Let the hate-filled screams of their souls ring out into the night. This was the same phenomenon that Schreiber had conjured up just a moment earlier.
脆い。そして弱すぎる。所詮は劣等の魂だったから。空気も大きい。
It was uncertain for how long the woman had been standing back to back with the somber man. Her tone was grim and bereft of joy, her visage deep crimson, her swaying hair the color of fresh blood and hellfire. She would possess a certain calculating beauty, were it not for the gruesome burn marks covering the left half of her face. As such, her visage evoked only a grim awe born from a marriage of the fair and the repugnant.
それで、私に何か不満があるのか、英雄。
Gracefully letting forth a puff of cigar smoke, the woman posed a question to the man at her back. No answer came.
まあいい。殺しすぎるシュライバーと合わせれば、ちょうど均衡が取れよう。無人の矜持だかなんだか知らん。せいぜい大事にするわよ。ここは奴らにうまく攻め落としてもらう必要がある。故に殺しすぎるのも殺さなさすぎるのも等しく罪だということを自覚しているなら何も言わん。それとも貴様、一度タガが外れれば皆殺しにしてしまいかねないから抑えている。であるな。
No one could be blamed for mistaking the Crimson Woman's words for those of a lunatic. No sane person would speak as if they were capable of destroying the entire Red Army surrounding Berlin on a whim.
宣告相当閣下が行かれた。無双家の長官殿にこううるさい宣伝やもいずれ後を追うだ。そして大量の市民と同胞を道連れにこの程度は陥落する。
Trial creation.
犠牲としては性質創造を試みるのになるほど適当な触媒だろう。敵を幾百万捧げたところで守るべき民、愛すべきと彼ら10人の方が命は重い。それが人間というもの。
ザミ
The man finally spoke.
メルクリウスどこ？
何？貴様、あれに何か用があるとか。
Silence again. The man failed to answer. The woman narrowed her eyes, her gaze heavy with suspicion, before letting loose an exasperated sigh.
やれやれ、まただんまり。寡黙すぎる男というのも考えものだな。まさかあれと戦おうなどと考えているわけでもあるまい。そして仮にそうだとしたらくだらんよ。バカバカしいからやめておけと言ってやる。あれは絶対に殺せ。いずれにせよ、あれは我々の上官であり、狩猟殿の盟友だ。貴様が範囲を持つというのなら、はっきり言って捨ておけん。
俺にそんなつもりは
Oh man, I love this guy's voice.
だろう。貴様の硬すぎる頭の中にそんな計算などあってたのだ。故に私はさっきの質問に答えている。
She lifted her head to look up at the sky.
我らが黒煙卓の指導者お二人は兄弟のごとく仲が良い。であれば必然
Sitting around
あ
the
れのいる
table.
場所は決定している。見るが
Meanwhile, up in the Berlin sky, tainted by blood and fire, taking form through the carnage of the capital, was a tremendous swastika. A man stood atop the towering spire at its center.
総員慶中、我らが主、偉大なるハガルの君の恩前である。そのお言葉、目視、刮目して拝聴せよ。
Her booming voice echoed in the ears of all living men in the city of Berlin as if through some sorcery. At that very moment, all soldiers ceased their fighting, all children dried their tears, and all elders stopped their flight. Each and every soul in the city gazed up to the sky as if possessed. Its deep canopy was tainted by the blood and fire of the city below, boiling as if it were some sort of cauldron. The Berlin Himmel. On the very day the 1,000-year Reich crumbled to dust, a devil of blinding light descended from the heavens. Whoa. His locks like a flowing mane, glow golden in color, his regal gaze equally golden. It was the gold of splendor, of brilliance surpassing creation itself, beauty mingling with heavy solemnity, yet at the same time beastly in hue. A being that should not exist in the realm of man, the harbinger of beguiling light. At his side, a man with features vague and twisted as the darkest of shadows. That guy has no arm. His arm's gone. He was garbed in the plain robes of a hermit, with ambiguous features that made it impossible to discern his age. A yin to his yang, the two of them existed on a level far removed from that of any being gazing up at them. They were the monsters whom even monsters feared. Number 1 and 13 of the Longinus Dreisen Order's Obsidian Round Table. Its leader and vice commander. Gazing down at Berlin, no, the entire world, the man of gold began his speech.
己の一生が全て定められていたとしたら何とする。勝者は勝者に、敗者は敗者に。 なるべくして生まれ、どのような経緯をたどろうとその結末へと帰結する。この世界の仕組みとやらがそのようになっていたとしたら何とする？ならばどのような努力もどのような怠慢も祈りも願いも意味はない。神の恵みもそして裁きも全てそうなるように定められているだけだとしたら、ケラ悪魔の子、世界の敵として滅ぼされんとしている者たちは一辺の罪とがなしに侵され奪われ踏みにじられているに過ぎない。この忌むべき月頭の輪の中、死すらもまた解放ではない。永劫そこに至れば回帰をなし再び始まりに戻るのみ。そして故にこの後も無限に苦しみ無限に殺され続けるだろう。そのように生まれた以上そのようになるしかない。それを口惜しいと覆したいと。
The man's grim words reached every soul residing in Berlin. Nothing awaits you but eternal suffering, eternal defeat. The people of Berlin could not deny his claims. The Golden Beast's proclamation rang out with the urgency of the trumpet of the final judgment. This was a man possessed of a supernatural charisma. Utilizing extreme conditions in order to manipulate the wills of others was hardly a novel trick in and of itself. But the sheer scale of the man's performance here warranted deeper scrutiny. His voice possessed a magical quality, capable of penetrating the very heart of all those who heard it. The best comparison was to the cries of dragons from the Age of Legends, a juggernaut of a voice that would not fail to ensnare any mortal. And the being that possessed it was certainly no mortal. The Golden Beast, the Black Prince, the Harbinger of Beguiling Light, the Monarch of Destruction. Every word that passed forth from his lips was saturated in magic. He gave the command. If you wish to overcome your miserable lot in life, then offer your very soul. If you long to wash away the stigma of the defeated, take the pen and sign the pact with blood. It was the temptation of the devil himself. The Golden Monarch looked down upon the lesser beings crawling upon the earth and posed a question to them. The answer was all too evident. Grant us victory. Grant us victory. Seek Heil Victoria. A deep fissure ran across the man's perpetually beautiful face. To conjure the words of Dr. Faust, his features portrayed the uncanny equilibrium of a genuine smile and a grotesque sneer. Mephistopheles, the Harbinger of Beguiling Light. The name of the wicked fiend that could grant man's every wish in exchange for his living soul. The moment those ponderous words left his lips, the unthinkable happened. All men with guns in hands took them to their mouths. All those wielding blades thrust them deep into their own chests. Those without armaments plunged themselves into the hellfire still raging around them. Guns roared, still drank blood, men plunged to their deaths. Suicide unfolded on every street corner. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands rushed to their deaths with abnormal haste, their souls being absorbed into the Golden Monarch. It was an insatiable holocaust, engulfing the entire capital. This could not have been the first time. He had consumed countless souls in the past. Was this, then, the final ritual necessary for completing his task? A grand sacrificial altar, stained by the blood of soldiers and countrymen who had looked upon him as a savior, begging for salvation. In all its grimness, all its cruelty, all its terror, it was
美しい